I don't have a mama. Could I please spend the day with you? Naomi Clark, startled from her thoughts, blinked and looked down. Before her stood a little girl, maybe 3 years old, wrapped in a puffy red coat that had seen many winters. She hugged a well-loved teddy bear, and her wide, brown eyes shimmered with an earnest hope. Snowflakes rested on her dark lashes, as still as the breath she held. Naomi's brow furrowed. She scanned the area, confused by the request, until her eyes settled on a man several yards away. He was watching them, motionless. His coat was thin, his boots dusted with snow, yet his stance was not one of desperation. It was protective, quiet, and patient. Their gazes met. His eyes were warm, carrying a silent strength. They held a deep weariness, but also an undeniable tenderness as he observed the child at Naomi's feet. Naomi turned back to the little girl, her own voice, normally crisp and commanding from years of leading boardrooms, softening in a way that surprised her. "What's your name, little one?" The girl whispered, "Zuri. I just want to know what it feels like to hold a mama's hand, just for today." The words pierced something deep inside Naomi, a place so long dormant it ached. She swallowed hard, her breath a cloud in the frigid air. Looking down at her own gloved hand, she slowly extended it. Perhaps, she thought, on Christmas, they both deserved a small portion of joy. Zuri's face illuminated. Her small hand slid into Naomi's as if it had always been meant to be there. The man approached, and Naomi could now see the lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, the snow clinging to the stubble on his jaw. He crouched next to Zuri, gently brushing snow from her hood. "She isn't usually this forward," he said, his gaze lifting to Naomi. "But I suppose today, she just had to ask." Naomi nodded, a tightness forming in her throat. "She's courageous," he replied with simple truth. "So is her father." No bitterness colored his tone, only fact. There was no explanation, no apology for their sudden intrusion, just a quiet gratitude that she hadn't dismissed them. The park pulsed with life around them. Children in bright winter coats ran past, and parents laughed while pulling sleds. A brass band played carols near the entrance, where towering pines were draped in twinkling lights. The world seemed wrapped in a warmth that, until this moment, had not reached Naomi. She was dressed impeccably, as always, a luxurious cream coat over her shoulders, her usual heels swapped for practical snow boots. Her elegant braids framed a face that had appeared on magazine covers and business profiles. Yet beneath the polished exterior, she felt like delicate glass, poised to shatter. Tucked in her designer handbag was a Christmas card from her board of directors, its printed message reading, "Thank you for leading us through another record-breaking year." It was another sterile trophy of her success. And here, a little girl in a public park had just offered her more genuine connection than she had felt in a decade. "Would you two care to walk with me for a little while?" Naomi asked gently. Zuri beamed, nodding her head vigorously. The man, Elijah Brooks, paused, searching Naomi's eyes before offering a small smile. She would like that very much. And so they walked, an unlikely trio in the eyes of the world, a millionaire CEO, a man who smelled of sawdust and the cold, and a girl with worn mittens and a heart bigger than the sky. But in that moment, it felt like the beginning of a healing they all desperately needed. The snow crunched beneath Naomi's boots as they meandered through the park, Zuri's tiny hand held firmly in hers. The little girl swung their joined arms with pure delight, her red coat a vibrant splash of happiness against the winter white. Elijah followed at a respectful distance, close enough to be a guardian, but far enough not to intrude. His gaze remained on Zuri with the steady warmth of a beacon in a storm. Whenever Naomi glanced back, he would offer a calm, reassuring nod, a silent message that Zuri was safe with her. They paused at a cart selling ice cream, the vendor chuckling that the cold never deterred a child's craving for sweets. Naomi knelt down. "What flavor would you like, sweetheart?" Zuri's voice was shy. "Vanilla, with sprinkles, please." Naomi smiled, paying with a crisp bill. "Vanilla it is. So, tell me a little about yourself." Zuri's cheeks puffed out as she licked her cone. "Papa makes toys from wood. He made me a rocking horse and a dragon." Naomi laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. "A dragon?" Zuri giggled. "Yep. He doesn't breathe fire, but he guards my bed. And Papa tells me stories every night, but he's not very good at doing princess hair." Naomi's laughter rang out like a bell. Well, maybe I could give it a try sometime. I've read my share of fairy tales. Zuri's eyes grew wide. Really? Like Cinderella? Naomi nodded. Cinderella, Rapunzel, even the little match girl. Zuri's expression turned solemn. I love that one, but she was so cold. Naomi paused, looking down at the child and gently dusting snowflakes from her coat. Then let's make sure today is warm, all right? Zuri nodded. They wandered past market stalls laden with gingerbread and handmade scarves. Naomi bought her a small snow globe, a tiny village that glittered when shaken, which Zuri clutched to her chest like a precious gem. Elijah watched from the path's edge, his arms folded, his breath forming soft clouds. When Zuri looked for him, he gave her a quiet wave and a smile. They snapped a selfie together in front of a giant snowman, Naomi crouching to Zuri's level, their cheeks pressed together. For a moment, she forgot the boardrooms, the profit margins, the profound silence of her penthouse apartment. The pivotal moment arrived in the heart of the park, before a colossal Christmas tree aglow with thousands of golden lights. Naomi knelt beside Zuri, helping her reach for an ornament shaped like a bell. Zuri hesitated, then leaned in close to whisper, "You're warm, just like I always thought a mama would be." The world fell silent. Naomi froze, the chill coming not from the air, but from the profound weight of that simple truth. A place deep inside her that had been sealed off by grief and resignation cracked open. She had once dreamed of being a mother, of lullabies and messy kitchens and sleepy bedtime hugs. Life had cruelly told her that future was not for her. And now, this little girl, not hers, unplanned, was speaking the very words her heart had longed to hear. Naomi wrapped her arms around Zuri, holding her tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for letting me be your mama for today." Behind them, Elijah approached slowly, sensing the sanctity of the moment. He sat on the bench beside them as snow collected on his shoulders. Naomi turned to him, her voice low and full of emotion. "You've raised a little angel." Elijah offered a small smile, his eyes on Zuri. "She raised me first." They sat in silence, sipping hot chocolate that warmed Naomi's hands. But it was the child on her lap and the quiet man beside her that thawed something much deeper. For the first time in years, Naomi felt not powerful or accomplished, but simply real. The bus hissed as it pulled up to the snowy curb. Naomi stood by the bus stop bench, hands deep in her coat pockets, watching Zuri hold Elijah's hand tightly. "I had fun today," Zuri beamed up at her. "You're the best mom I ever had, even if it was just for a little while." Naomi smiled, her heart aching with a strange new warmth. She crouched to Zuri's level, tucking a stray coil of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for letting me be." As Elijah and Zuri prepared to board the bus, Naomi hesitated, her voice suddenly uncertain, almost shy. "Would it be all right if I saw her again?" Elijah paused, glancing down at Zuri, who was already tugging his sleeve with pleading eyes. His expression softened. "If it makes her smile like that, I could never say no." 3 days later, they stood before a tall, modern townhouse with glass framing, a world away from the modest apartment Elijah and Zuri called home. He nervously adjusted his flannel collar as Naomi opened the door. "Please, come in," she said gently. "You're not guests. You're family." The inside was immaculate but not cold, with soft lighting, warm wooden floors, and the scent of cinnamon and something baking. Zuri clapped her hands in delight. "It smells like cookies." Naomi laughed and led her to the kitchen. "That's because we're about to make some." Elijah lingered at the threshold, everything feeling too clean, too quiet, too different. But then he saw Zuri, her little hands in a mixing bowl, a dusting of flour on her nose, and his shoulders relaxed. Naomi offered him coffee, not some fancy imported blend, but regular coffee in a simple mug. "I hope this is okay." He took it, nodding. "It's perfect." Each visit felt more natural. Naomi never tried to impress, only to connect. She let Zuri decorate cookies, draw on her home office whiteboard, and even climb onto her lap during video conference calls. Elijah, though still reserved, began to open up, talking about his carpentry, about books, about the life he knew before it became consumed by diapers and bills. One evening, after Zuri had fallen asleep on the sofa, clutching a teddy bear Naomi had found in an old chest, Elijah stood on the balcony. The city lights twinkled like distant stars. Naomi joined him, draping a soft blanket over his shoulders. "She's a beautiful child," she said softly. "She's my everything." Elijah replied, his eyes on the horizon. They stood in a comfortable silence until Naomi turned, her voice tentative. "She's not your daughter, is she?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He looked down, his fingers tightening on his mug. "No, not by blood." Naomi watched him, her gaze gentle. He looked back at her, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. "But by every beat of my heart." That sentence hung in the air between them, sacred and profound. Naomi didn't speak. She simply reached out and gently touched his hand for the first time, a quiet acknowledgement of a truth they were both beginning to feel. They were no longer just visitors in each other's lives. Something real was beginning to grow. Snow had fallen heavily that night, blanketing the world in a muffled stillness. Elijah had just returned from a late job fixing a neighbor's porch when he saw it, a small wicker basket resting on his doorstep. He froze. Inside lay a baby, tiny and wrapped in a frayed pink blanket with a bear stitched on the corner. There was no name, no letter, just a single piece of paper with ink smudged by snowflakes. "Please don't hate her." He stood there for minutes, staring into the infant's eyes. They were wide open, a deep, knowing brown, and unblinking. Elijah had never held a baby, never changed a diaper, never warmed a bottle. But something in that steady gaze made it impossible to walk away. He took her inside. That night began a blur of crying, pacing, and desperately searching online how to sterilize bottles at 3 in the morning. He sold what little he owned, left his full-time job, and started taking odd jobs, fixing gutters, patching walls, anything to pay for rent and formula. But she never lacked for love. He read her fairy tales until she fell asleep, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. He hummed old songs when she cried. He named her Zuri, not for any particular reason, but because it sounded like hope. Now, sitting across from him in her warm kitchen, Naomi listened in silence as Zuri slept upstairs. Elijah spoke plainly, with no need for embellishment. "I was terrified," he admitted. "But I couldn't just leave her there. I couldn't." Naomi whispered, "Why didn't you call social services?" Elijah gave a faint, sad smile. "Because I knew I wasn't her best option. I was just the only one who didn't walk away." The room went still. Naomi stared at him, her lips slightly parted. Then, almost involuntarily, she began to speak. "When I was 27, I thought I was going to be a mother." Elijah looked up as she continued, her voice low and even. "I was in love, or so I believed. He talked about our future, said all the right things." She paused, swallowing. "We heard the heartbeat at 12 weeks. I had never felt such joy. But at 16 weeks, there was a complication. The memory was sharp. The emergency room, the cold hands, and then a doctor with kind eyes telling me it would be difficult, nearly impossible, to carry a child again." Elijah just listened. Naomi kept her eyes on her tea. He left, said it was too much, that I should focus on healing. What he meant, she said with a short, humorless laugh, was that he didn't want the burden of loving someone who couldn't give him what he wanted. There was another silence, not awkward, but profound, as if two souls were finally showing their scars. "I never really cried," Naomi said, finally looking up. "Because Naomi Clark doesn't cry. Not in boardrooms, not in hospitals, not even alone in the dark." Elijah studied her elegant, composed face, but saw the vulnerability breaking through in her eyes. "It's not just that I'm alone," she added quietly. "It's that no one ever stays long enough to see the parts of me I try so hard to hide." In that kitchen, surrounded by snow and the quiet ticking of a clock, something shifted. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer grand words. He just looked at her with eyes that held no pity, only a deep, resonant understanding. And for the first time in a very long time, Naomi didn't feel like she had to be strong. She just had to be. The days melted into one another, and a new rhythm settled over Naomi's house, built not on grand pronouncements, but on the quietest of routines. Naomi began teaching Zuri how to write on a chalkboard in the sunroom, where light poured in each afternoon. The little girl would grip the chalk with fierce concentration, her tongue peeking out as she formed big, clumsy letters. "M.E.M.A.," she read aloud one day, her voice filled with wonder. She grinned. "That's you." Naomi blinked, caught off guard, then smiled, a slight tremble on her lips. "Yes, I guess it is." Down the hall, Elijah heard the exchange. He didn't interrupt, simply leaning against the doorframe with a storm of emotions in his eyes. Later, while washing dishes, he watched Zuri climb onto Naomi's lap for a bedtime story, a ritual that had once belonged solely to him. He dried his hands slowly, a weight settling in his chest. Naomi was always careful, never overstepping. She would glance at Elijah for unspoken permission before holding Zuri's hand too long or kissing her forehead. But feelings don't ask for permission. She had fallen into a rhythm with Zuri, and with it, a rhythm with Elijah too. He was nothing like the men from her world. He wore no expensive suits, held no corporate arrogance. He was simply a man who could build a swing set from scratch, who remembered how Zuri liked her oatmeal, who fixed a leaky faucet without fanfare. And he was kind. A quiet, fierce kindness. Still, an unspoken tension grew between them. The breaking point arrived on a cool Saturday. Naomi had taken Zuri to the park while Elijah repaired a shelf at the house. They had shared ice cream and picked daisies on a hillside. Lying in the grass, Zuri turned to her. "Mama Naomi?" Naomi brushed a curl from the child's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart." Zuri's eyes were wide and honest. "If I have a Mama Naomi now, do I still need my daddy?" Time stopped. Naomi's entire body went rigid. Her breath hitched, her heart pounding in her ears. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she managed to say, "You will always need your daddy, Zuri. He is your home." Zuri nodded, satisfied, and went back to her flower. But the question echoed in Naomi's mind. That night, she didn't stay for dinner. She sent a text saying something had come up, that she needed space. Elijah read it twice, then sat at the kitchen table long after Zuri was asleep. Naomi sat alone in her car a block away, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She had thought the hardest part of letting someone in was fear, but she was wrong. It was guilt. What if the love she felt for Zuri was a kind of theft? What if every smile and bedtime kiss was slowly taking something precious from Elijah, something she had no right to? The thought that her feelings for him might be reciprocated scared her more than any corporate failure ever had. She whispered into the silence, "I never meant to take her from you." But the silence only offered a question in return. What will you do with this love, now that it's real? And for the first time in years, Naomi Clark had no answer. Naomi vanished. Not dramatically, but with a quiet, devastating finality. The call stopped. The texts went unanswered. No more visits. No more shared meals or chalkboard lessons. Just silence. Elijah noticed immediately, but didn't push. He didn't mention it to Zuri, who asked every day, "Is Mama Naomi coming today?" He would just smile gently, brush back her hair, and say, "Maybe tomorrow, sweet girl." But the tomorrows stretched into a week, then two. Elijah poured everything he had into being all Zuri needed. He made her favorite soups, read her extra stories, and carved her a new bunny from soft pine wood. He smiled wider and laughed louder. But at night, alone at the kitchen table, he wondered what he had done wrong. Then came the storm. It began with a small cough. By bedtime, Zuri's forehead was burning. Elijah held her all night, his own panic a cold knot in his stomach. By morning, her fever was worse. Her lips were dry, her skin clammy. Outside, a blizzard raged, blanketing the world in white. He bundled her in every warm thing they owned and carried her through the blinding snow to the nearest urgent care. A nurse saw them and rushed them back immediately. But hours later, despite medication, her fever refused to break. Elijah sat by the small bed, his hands shaking as Zuri whimpered in her sleep. His phone was in his hand before he'd even made the decision. He hesitated for only a second before dialing her name. It rang once. 20 minutes later, Naomi burst through the hospital door, her coat still dusted with snow. She didn't speak. She walked straight to Zuri's bedside and knelt. Elijah looked up, seeing her for the first time in weeks. "Her fever won't go down," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know," Naomi replied softly. She took Zuri's small hand in her own and pressed a cool cloth to the girl's forehead. "It's going to be all right, sweetheart. Mama's here." Elijah turned away, his chest tight with emotion. For hours, they sat together. Naomi refused to leave, humming lullabies and whispering words of comfort. When Zuri finally settled into a deeper, calmer sleep, her little body curled into Naomi's lap as if it were the most natural place in the world. Elijah watched them. He had never seen Zuri look so peaceful. He moved closer and sat beside them. I was afraid, he said quietly, his voice rough with unshed tears. I was afraid she would love you more. Naomi's breath caught. But now, he continued, looking at the two of them, I understand. Maybe she needs us both. Naomi reached for his hand, her fingers curling tightly around his, saying everything words could not. In the quiet hum of the hospital, something between them began to heal. Not everything, not yet, but enough. For the first time in weeks, neither of them was alone. 1 year later, snow blanketed a small hilltop cottage in soft, glistening white. The air was crisp, and the chimney puffed a steady trail of smoke into the winter sky. This was nothing like Naomi's former life in a glass penthouse, a world of cold steel and polished solitude. That life was defined by power and deadlines. This home, this little cabin of pine and warmth, was built on quiet joys. Its wooden beams held the echoes of laughter, and its walls remembered bedtime stories, not boardroom commands. Inside, Naomi hummed as she stirred a pot of stew, her hair in a messy bun, a smudge of flour on her cheek. Beside her, Elijah carefully carved the final details into a miniature rocking horse for a child at the shelter, an initiative of the nonprofit they had founded together. Their hands moved in a comfortable rhythm, the easy sync of two people who no longer needed words. Zuri, now 4 and bursting with imagination, dashed into the kitchen with glitter in her hair, waving a crayon drawing. Mama, Papa, look. It's our house with stars on the roof. That means it's magic. Naomi knelt and pulled her into a hug, laughing. It's beautiful, sweetheart. And you know what? I think you're right. It is magic. Their foundation was called One More Day, a name born from a single day of kindness that had rewritten all their futures. It now served dozens of families, offering meals, toys, and hope. Later that evening, after stories by the fire, Naomi stepped outside into the still, snowy night. She inhaled the cold, pine-scented air and felt a deep peace settle in her bones. Elijah came out a moment later, wrapping a wool scarf around her shoulders. Still adjusting to country life? He asked, a gentle amusement in his voice. Naomi smiled, her eyes on the stars. I've burned 5 loaves of bread and gotten glue stuck in my eyelashes, but I've never been happier. He smiled and reached into his pocket. I have something for you. He held out a small, handcrafted wooden box. Inside, on dark velvet, lay a ring carved from the same cherry wood. No diamond, no gold, just a perfect circle shaped by his hands and his heart. Naomi's breath caught as she met his gaze, which was steady, kind, and full of love. Elijah knelt on one knee in the snow. You're not the miracle I asked for, Naomi, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. You're the miracle I didn't even know I needed. Will you be my wife? Tears welled in her eyes as she dropped to her knees too, the snow soaking her jeans. She wrapped her arms around his neck, laughing through her tears. Yes, she whispered, her voice shaking with joy. Yes, let's build this life. Not perfect, but ours. Inside, Zuri peeked through the frosted window. When she saw them, she squealed with delight. That night, the little house glowed brighter than ever, its love spilling out into the quiet of Christmas Eve. On the anniversary of their meeting, the 3 of them returned to the park. The town square was lit up again, bustling with families and music. But this time, they were not on the outside looking in. They were a part of it. Naomi wore a warm wool coat, and Elijah held a thermos of hot chocolate. Between them, holding both their hands, was Zuri, taller now, her eyes sparkling brighter than any of the lights. As they walked past the bench where Naomi had once sat alone, Zuri tugged on their hands. Can we spend every day together forever? Elijah and Naomi looked at each other, their hands tightening around Zuri's. Forever and ever, they said in unison. Zuri stopped, throwing her arms around their legs and looking up with that old soul in her eyes. I don't have a mama, she said, and then a radiant smile broke across her face. But now I have Mama Naomi, and it's forever. Naomi knelt, tears of pure joy in her eyes. Yes, sweetheart, forever. They embraced as snow began to fall, soft and gentle as a promise kept. And in the quiet of the evening, a family, not of blood, but of choice, stood whole and complete.